So I would like to call the Mason County Board of Health meeting to order. It's September 27th at 3 p.m. And there's lots of new faces on here. So I'm not sure. Let's see, we have Carrie Gardner, who is our health office, our doctor for the Board of Health, health officer. We have me and Kathy McDowell, City of Shelton. We have Melissa Casey, Public Health, Sharon Trask, Mason County Commissioner. Mike, who are you representing? Schultz, you're muted.
So I can jump in here. This is Jeff. So I'm joined from Orca, and I'm joined by Mike Schultz, Odell Hadley, and Lauren Wybrew is here as well. And so, that's your Orca contingent. So, but I'll wait to introduce them till our part of the agenda. And
we have Darren Moody with Hospital District 1, and we have not Carrie Gardner. We have Carrie with the school board, and we have Ian with the Board of Health, and Steve with the fire commissioners. We have Mason Web TV, and it's probably Mackenzie instead of Diane Zorn. We have Todd Parker with Mason County Health Department, and Haley, and Tim Wood. Did you say Tim is, that's with the FSC group. We have I know Todd Chase, and we have Lauren Wybrew, and Randy joined us. Did I miss anybody? Okay, so I'd like a motion to approve the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda.
A second.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, we'll move on. And I would like a motion for the minutes. And Kathy, I think that we discussed one amendment or change.
We need to make a change to the minutes. My name was left off, but I was there.
Of the attendees.
Of the attendees, yes. So I moved to change that.
And approve it as such?
And approve as such, yes. There you go.
Okay. Do I have a second?
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Any other discussion? Go ahead, Randy.
I'll just second with that amendment.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we will move on to Carrie Gardner.
And Peggy, my apologies. I feel like there are two agendas that are in circulation. Does your agenda have as number 9 and 10 Orca presentation and housing needs assessment?
Yes.
Okay. I would like to amend the agenda to remove number 6. There is no environmental health report today. Is Ian, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct.
I kind of wondered about that, but
yeah, I never submitted a report for today.
I just thought I could have him say if there was anything pending or anything he wanted to bring up.
Absolutely.
Sure, I could mention a couple of very minor things.
Okay, so we'll still keep you on the agenda.
Okay, thank you. And I will be combining the health officer report and the director's report as Dave is not here. And if you will allow me to wax poetic at the beginning, just like there are signs that fall is on the way with cooler temperatures and leaves turning, there are signs that the winter of COVID-19 may be turning to summer. Signs like the governor's proclamation that the state of emergency is ending and our dropping number of new cases, hospitalizations, and deaths from COVID-19. The illnesses that people are currently experiencing with COVID are milder, and the new vaccines have been updated to cover the BA4 and 5 variants. Thus, we are encouraging people to get yet another booster. As this winter of COVID ends, I would like to thank Mason Health and the Board of Health, as well as the hardworking staff of Mason County Public Health, for the extraordinary efforts that helped keep our community safe. COVID will continue to be present, but I am hopeful that it will remain a less aggressive virus, just like influenza. As you can see in the director's report, we are pivoting back to foundational public health services. One of the key areas that we are excited to focus on starting immediately is screening and treatment for hepatitis C. I mentioned this at our last board meeting, and we are really ramping up our partnerships with Mason Health, the tribes, corrections departments, all the rest of the community stakeholders, because hepatitis C is a terrible disease that leads to liver failure and cancer, but it's totally treatable with just a pill taken twice a day. This is going to be a big push for our department, and we hope that the excitement of making Mason County hep-free C will catch on, because this is one of those rare opportunities to both save healthcare dollars and to save lives at the same time. Concurrent with treating and screening hepatitis C, we are continuously working to improve our response to the opioid crisis. Here, Mason County is struggling. Of the 17 counties that report overdoses in Washington state, Mason County has the highest rate per capita of opioid fatalities. The biggest contributors are, of course, the opiates, but methamphetamines are featured prominently in the data as well. Mr. Darren Moody chided me about ending on a positive note at the last meeting, so I would like to choose 2 bright spots to close with. We have had success tamping the monkeypox outbreak. Only 1 individual in Mason County tested positive, but that being said, we still have vaccine, and we would still like to vaccinate those who are high risk in Mason County. Please contact us to set up a date and time if you would like to be vaccinated. And then I'd like to thank the City of Shelton for bringing public health into the homeless task force that has been created to help address the housing needs of our community. There is so much that public health can bring to the discussion and to the solutions. And I'd like to put in a shout out to our new directors, Ian Tracy and Melissa Casey, for their professionalism and their expertise that they have been bringing to our department. And then lastly, I'd like to appreciate the crews of Central Mason Fire and Battalion Chief Casey Whitehouse in particular for allowing me to do a ride along and to witness their extraordinary work. I am looking forward to connecting more with the people and community services of Mason County. This is the end of my first year as your health officer.
Thank you very much for all that you do.
Much more positive ending on it. Good job.
I'm glad you liked it, Darren.
Madam Chair, if I may, a question.
Yes.
So is the health department now administering the vaccine? Or
Yes.
do they go to, okay, so we literally do it right here in house, huh?
Yes.
Okay, I have a community I can reach out to here that I need to. We talked before, but there was no place to send them, so I'll do that.
Thank you, Randy.
Okay, so David sent out the administrative report, and I guess if you have any questions on that, you can ask Carrie because she probably has a better insight on that. Any questions about the report?
I had just a quick question. I was reading in the board report that was sent out that, you know, school guidance may or may not get updated. I guess when would we be potentially hearing about that? And I understand you're always in communication with the schools with different points of contact there, but I was just curious if we anticipate changes or what those might be at the end of this emergency proclamation.
We are expecting changes, but the Department of Health has not told us when those will be released. So at this point, we're still operating under the old guidance.
Okay, thank you.
So I guess we'll move on to the environmental health report. And even, do you have anything you want to contribute?
I can only think of two things, like I said, very minor. Due to delays in spending out our water quality grants from COVID impacts to our operations, the Department of Health has extended several of our water quality grants through December 31st. So that's a bit of a funding change, and it gives us some more money or gives us some more time to spend out that money. One of those grants is not really impacted very much because we've already spent it out, but the other grant does have some significant funds in it that will let us do a lot of good work in Hood Canal. So that's about all I got.
Thank you. Okay, so Melissa, you're up.
Good afternoon. I've submitted our July-August community health report. I've also been asked to keep it a little short just because we have some great speakers here today. I don't want to cut into any presentation time. So what I will share is that we are really continuing business as usual. As a newer manager, I'm really just kind of focusing right now on working with staff and really getting to know what their day-to-day is and seeing how we can make adjustments as needed to meet the need based on what data is, what the community needs. So that is kind of where we are now. I invite you to review the report that was submitted in the packet. And if you have any questions, I'm here. You can email them or you can direct them now. But I'd really like to just allow as much time as possible to our guest speakers.
Okay. Any other business and board discussion before we move on to our presentation? Okay. Hearing none, I guess you're up, Jeff.
Okay, well, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for the invitation to be with you this afternoon. And thanks to Commissioner Netherland for connecting me with David to help get on the agenda to talk with you today. So again, my name is Jeff Johnston, and I'm the Executive Director at Orca, still relatively new, but I have been here for about 8 months, so not so new anymore. So I'm here this afternoon with 3 of my Orca colleagues, Lauren Wybrew, one of our engineers, Mike Schultz, our compliance supervisor, and Odell Hadley, our senior monitoring specialist. So I'm going to start off by just providing a bit of an Orca overview. And since our communication manager, Dan Nelson, wasn't able to be here today, I'll also just give a little bit of information about some of the outreach work, some of the things that Dan does, and then I'll hand it over to Lauren. And certainly feel free to interrupt me or my colleagues as we're going along. Would like this to be as much of a conversation or a discussion as a presentation. So let me dive in. So first of all, so Orca, the Olympic Region Clean Air Agency. So we have a jurisdiction of 6 counties, so the entire Olympic Peninsula and the coast all the way down to the Columbia, so more than 8,000 square miles. In addition to Mason County, our jurisdiction includes Clallam, Jefferson, Grays Harbor, Pacific, and Thurston counties. So, and our authority to do the work that we do comes from the Washington Clean Air Act, which authorizes Orca and the other local clean air agencies to enforce local, state, and federal clean air laws and regulations. So, of course, this is a very large area. We're a small agency of 17 folks with an office in Olympia. And so clearly partnerships and collaborations are critical to our success. And one of the recent conversations we've had that just like to highlight is myself and some of the Orca team, some of the same members that are here today, met recently with Kel Rowan and some of her team members in the community development office. So again, just trying to work to establish links between the different counties that we support, that we work with. So Orca is accountable to our 9-member board. 6 of the board members are county commissioners, and the other 3 are city council members from the 3 largest cities in our jurisdiction, which currently are Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater. And of course, Commissioner Netherland is the Mason County representative on the Orca board. So Orca's work is primarily paid for by fees and state and federal grants, which covers about 90% of our revenue. Fees are the fees that we charge for our permits, our asbestos notifications. And then there's also a per capita assessment for the municipalities as part of our jurisdiction. I mentioned earlier that about the local clean air agencies. So Orca is one of 7 local clean air agencies in the state. And for the counties that aren't covered by local air jurisdictions, the Department of Ecology provides the on the ground air quality work. So that's kind of my agency overview. Any questions on that before I talk a little bit about some of the outreach work that we do? Okay, not seeing any. Let me just dive in. So again, we're focused on air quality. And as Odell will talk about in a few minutes, one of the particulate pollution is really one of the main things that we look at in terms of air quality in our jurisdiction. And a big source of that is home heating and wood stoves. So for many years, we've had wood stove replacement programs. We currently have a couple different things going on. We've got like I said, a wood stove replacement program that's open to anybody in Thurston County and actually also most folks in Mason County, Shelton, the Shelton urban growth area, and then a 5-mile radius around the UGA perimeter. And so when replacing an old wood stove that's not compliant, that doesn't meet the 2020 standards, residents are eligible for $750 for replacement. With a pellet stove, $1,000 if they replace a wood stove, uncertified wood stove, with a natural gas or propane appliance, or $1,800 to offset the cost of an electric heat pump, either ducted or ductless. So again, we've got some good incentives, and that's a grant program from Department of Ecology that we use to pay for that program. We've also got a wood stove recycling award. So if somebody just has an old wood stove that they want to get rid of, we'll give folks $500 for the old wood stove, and then they can use that money to replace it, or they can use that for whatever they choose to use the $500 for. No replacement needed. So Dan also just wanted me to share that, well, of course, education outreach is a big focus of our agency. And again, we do what we can to reach out to partner agencies. We do have a lot of information on our website. We've got a lot of brochures that we can make available to groups. We can customize messages, customize brochures. If there's part of your community that you feel that it's important for us to reach, we can work with you to figure out how best to reach them. And again, we'll gladly meet with groups, organizations, neighborhood associations, and others to discuss the importance of air quality and Orca's role. So speaking of website, I'm really excited. We're kind of a few months into an effort to completely redesign and relaunch a new Orca website that will be launched probably in February sometime. So really excited about that. It'll be much easier to find information, be much more visually or much more visual than our current site. Although we do have a good site, and when I get done here, I'll put a link to the website in the chat. But just keep in mind that we've got a new website coming. So with that, I think I'll end unless there are any questions, and I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I see nods, so all right. So my name is Lauren. I am one of 4 engineers at Orca, or really we're permit writers. So what Jeff was explaining, in our jurisdiction, we, as part of the Clean Air Act, we are responsible for reviewing air permit applications and reviewing implications of proposed businesses or facilities. And so I'm going to do my best to give a very short 5,000-foot level view of our entire job in that realm in about 3 minutes. So feel free to unmute and ask me questions. Don't be shy. So part of the Clean Air Act, what we do is we refer to these permit applications for outdoor air emissions as notice of constructions. So I like to think, the most common question I get from public, industry, local air agencies is, when do I need a permit? When do I need an Orca permit? I like to think of it as broken down into 4 loose categories. And I ask myself, Does it burn fuel? If you burn fuel, that combustion is going to have outdoor air emissions usually. Will liquids be used, treated, or stored? Is there a potential for dust or particulate, as Jeff mentioned earlier? That usually comes in the forms of things like sawmills, is what we see a lot of. And the fourth kind of catch-all that doesn't fit those other three categories being manufacturing and processing. Now, when I first started this job, there are a lot of industries that I did not realize emit air pollution until I got this job. So for example, fuel burning examples, right? I think of boilers, emergency engines, you're burning gasoline, burning diesel. But what about things like crematories, coffee roasting? Those are also fuel burning examples that we actually review the toxic air pollutants or things that contribute to the outdoor air pollution from things like coffee roasters and crematories, because they are burning, but it's just a different kind of fuel. The other category that I think about for liquid storage, use of liquid, or treatment of liquid, some of the more obvious examples are spray painting. So auto body shops, we've got a lot of auto body shops that paint cars in our jurisdiction. They have to be in spray booths. But some less obvious ones, gas stations, storing that gasoline. That gasoline wants to readily evaporate into the atmosphere, and which contributes to ground level ozone, creates those hazy days on warm summer days that we see. Breweries. If the breweries are large enough, we even write permits and need to review the emissions from breweries, or wastewater treatment plants, the treatment of the water when they use chlorine, or some of them use sludge digesters. Those are processes that emit into the air that we want to that we're required to take a look at. The third category being emissions of dust or potential for dust or particulate sources. I mentioned earlier sawmills. That's kind of the first one, at least I think of in my head. But other things include abrasive blasting. So abrasive blasting holes on marine vessels at some of the ports, or rock crushing pits that generates a lot of dust. And in that case, even respirable silica. And the fourth kind of catch-all for just general processing facilities that really don't fit in the fuel burning or the liquid treatment storage, and not necessarily have a potential for dust, but they just do general processing. You know, most people will think of chemical manufacturing plants, which we do have some, our mechanical paper mills, we have those too. But some other lesser known ones that I think of are commercial composting. Commercial composting emits hazardous air pollutants and toxic air pollutants into the air that we need to take a look at. Food processing plants, veneer and plywood production, landfills, especially if they use a flare, they're usually, that landfill is processing a bunch of garbage in the ground and it's off-gassing, that goes up into the air. Soil vapor extraction. So what is often a water quality problem at gas stations when the underground storage tanks leak gasoline into the ground, some of the facilities, one of the ways they treat that is through soil vapor extraction or air sparging, and they put air down into the soil to vaporize or put the gasoline air back up into the air as part of that treatment to help groundwater, but then it becomes an air issue that we want to take a look at. I think if there's one takeaway I want anyone to have is that air regulations are complicated and applicability determinations are complicated. And we are a small agency. Like I said, I'm one of 4 people. We man our phones and our email during regular work hours. And I just tell everybody, just give us a call. If you ever have a question or a question from a facility, or you think something might need a permit, you just pick up the phone, give us a call, shoot me an email. Because whether or not something requires a permit will depend on the size, it'll depend on the type of fuel, depend on sometimes where it's sited. And really the best assistance I can give is when I get to work with that applicant directly.
So Lauren, do you ever look at things like the pot grow places and the fumes that come off of that?
Yes, the the longstanding odor from marijuana. They do not require a notice of construction. I know I don't have personal experience with them, but Mike, who's going to be up speaking a little bit about some of our other general regulations, might be able to speak more to what Orca's role has been, which has, been constantly evolving in the last few years with odor from marijuana facilities. But the short answer is no, we do not require notice of construction applications for marijuana processing and growing.
But perhaps that is a good segue to Mike, unless there are any other questions for Lauren. Okay,
Great.
Mike, take it away. Maybe talk about about Orca's role with grow operations. Mike, we can't hear you. Can't hear you. Let's see, maybe we should go to Odell and then we can come. Well, it looks like Mike's grabbing maybe a set of headphones. I know we recently issued Mike a new laptop, so he's maybe got some tech issues with his new laptop. Well, now you're muted, Mike. You're muted. And now it looks like you're frozen. So why don't we go to Odell? And I know Odell has some slides. Oh, well, you're unfro. Nope, we're not hearing you, Mike. So let's go to Odell. And while Odell's giving her presentation, maybe Mike can try rebooting or something to get his audio working. Odell?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Oh, yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, I can talk to you, but I cannot turn on my video. So I'm also having technical difficulties. I have closed Teams, but it sometimes fights with Zoom for control of my camera and my mic, and I have tried to solve this problem, but and I was trying to help Mike because maybe he's having the same problem, but I'm not sure what's going on. Anyway, so air quality, Orca monitors the ambient air quality in all 6 of our counties. As Jeff mentioned, we monitor for air quality for PM 2.5 mostly. We also have a few sites where we monitor ozone, and I run a site up in Nia Bay that's part of a federal NCOR a federal network site that monitors CO gas, SO2, NOI, and particulate as well. And it's really more of a background site to provide the rural background concentrations for the rest of the country. It is one of the cleanest sites in the country, except for when we have wildfires, then it's not. So PM 2.5, what is it? I have this graphic here that you guys have probably seen, and as Department of Health, you possibly even used in your own presentations, but it's an airborne particle where the particle has a diameter less than 2.5 micrometers. If you're not familiar with what a micrometer is, this graphic kind of shows you, here's the width of the average human hair. These blue dots would be the PM10, which was the historic measure of particulate matter. And then within that PM10, these red dots are PM 2.5. So as the science evolved, we determined and we found that PM 2.5 is definitely more of a health hazard and can penetrate much further into the body than PM10. And so it's become the new standard for monitoring particulate. And even before PM10, we actually monitored for total suspended particulate, which included smoke and dust and sea salt and all sorts of big to small particles. And that was any particle that was small enough to remain in the air, which is a lot, and they can be pretty large. Through mass, the PM 2.5 is really the best measure of air quality as it pertains to health impacts. So, come on, there we go. Our air monitoring network, each county, we have at least one PM 2.5 air monitor in the county, and our purpose is to monitor the worst ambient air quality in each county. So what do I mean by that? We don't want to measure the smoke coming out of someone's chimney. We want to measure sort of a well-mixed air quality that represents a large area, but we also don't want to, monitor in a very rural or remote area that's far away from the city or all the sources, so that we're not picking up the most polluted areas. So Mason County's air monitor is currently located at the Shelton Fire Station on West Franklin Street, and that has been there since April 2011. Prior to that, we had an air monitor at Mason County General Hospital, and that was there between 2001 and 2011. And we use this data to evaluate our compliance with national ambient air quality standards. Currently, that standard is you cannot exceed 12 micrograms per meter cubed for the annual average. And then more than that, the 24-hour average should not exceed 35 micrograms per meter cubed. And I believe we can exceed that up to 7 or 8 times a year and not violate the standard. So if we exceed that level more than 8 times or 8 times or more, then we could be in violation of the standard. We also use the data to determine if we need an area-wide burn ban. If we think that this 24-hour average might actually be exceeded, we would discuss to whether or not we need to declare a burn ban. And we also try to publish these data in as real time as possible to allow the public to make decisions about their own outdoor activity and exposure risk. So we convert the PM 2.5 into an AQI, or an air quality index. It's just easier for the public to look at these color codes and know, oh, green is good, moderate, orange, unhealthy for sensitive groups. And it's a unitless number that just has an index. And then this is the actual PM 2.5 concentration that corresponds to those colors, if someone wants to look at that. We also have an AQI for ozone. And when you have a site that has both PM 2.5 and ozone monitors, the worst one, so if your PM 2.5 is good, but we've got 71 to 85 parts per billion of ozone, that site's going to show up as orange. So it's really important to make sure you know what pollutant you're looking at and what the AQI for that pollutant is. So in Mason County, I've plotted up the historical PM 2.5 based air quality for Mason County going back to January 2001. In dark blue, this is when we had the monitor at the hospital. And then in red, it shows you when we switched over to the fire station. So you don't see a lot of differences. You see higher values in the winter, and that corresponds to use of wood stoves. It can also be exacerbated by really cold snaps where we have temperature inversions that trap all that wood smoke right down near the surface and concentrate it and really drive those values up. And then in the summertime, we see much better air quality, average around 5 micrograms per meter cubed. And in most recent years, what I want to point out here is that our summer air quality has really improved, and we've seen that in most of our regions, but we are starting to see these big spikes from wildfire smoke. And I just want to reiterate that these values are monthly averages. So these high spikes are being driven really by a few days where we would just get really bad air quality, which I know that you have all experienced and you know what I'm talking about. So this is sort of a new aspect of air monitoring relative to 20 years ago. So a couple of years ago, we did the Mason County saturation study that was between June 2019 and June 2020. We installed purple air sensors. These are low-cost sensors that a lot of the public have been installing. We've installed 4 throughout Mason County at these 4 locations. One of them was installed right next to our monitor just to verify that they're measuring the same thing. And the purpose of the study is to determine whether our current monitoring location is representative of the county's ambient air quality. And in areas where maybe it isn't as representative, I would compare with other nearby monitors that may be run by another agency to see if that might be a better representation of that community's air monitor, so that we can guide the public on where to look or what monitor to look to. So here is some data. These are scatter plots between our nephelometer, which is our permanent air monitor at the fire station in downtown Shelton. This is the co-located purple air sensor. So you can see that the relationship between the two is excellent, with R squared values close to 1. That's the correlation coefficient. We also see fairly good representation at the Timberlake site, at Bordeaux Elementary, and even in Belfair, which is quite far from Shelton. And I actually thought maybe the Bremerton monitor that's run by Pisgah might be a better representation of Belfair, but that did not turn out to be the case. So we are pretty happy with the location of downtown Shelton as the monitor. Currently, there are 8 public, or both public and Orca, including Orca's purple air sensor, located in Mason County. So I've been keeping an eye on these data. I can download the data, and it's kind of a shift away from our earlier saturation studies that would just happen for the 1 year and then be done. But with the increase in public air sensors, I can look at these data anytime and compare our sensor to the air quality throughout the county. And so these are the locations right now, snapshot of the currently available public sensors. And then I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the most recent smoke episodes that we are seeing this summer. So this was from last week. We saw some smoke coming into the region, and actually we've been sort of experiencing smoke moving in and out of the region, but this is a satellite image. I just wanted to show you, this is the Bolt Creek fire that was just dumping a whole lot of smoke into Seattle, and you can see that on the Seattle air monitors right here in the reds and purples and oranges. But we got really lucky down here in Olympia and Mason County. We had a few yellow moderate groups, but for the most part it was kind of on the verge between moderate and good. So a lot of these green dots were just on the good side of that cutoff line. And even though in the satellite map you see a lot of smoke, that was all upper level. So we had hazy skies, and the sun was a little bit yellow to orange, but down at the surface we got lucky, and where we're breathing the air, it was actually still pretty good. So I just wanted to show that. And that is, and then tools for staying informed. I wanted to give a shout out. So EPA Air Now, you can sign up for EnviroFlash air quality alert tools. I update those if I forecast that the air quality is going to be poor. A notice will go out to anyone that's subscribed to this EnviroFlash info to let you know. And if the air quality actually hits some orange or red levels, then that would send out a notification as well. EPA's fire and smoke map is a great tool. It incorporates the purple air sensors with our sensors and applies a correction factor. If you go to the purple air map and you do not apply a correction factor, it's going to overpredict the degraded air quality by about a factor of 2 to 3. So it's really important to apply that conversion factor if you are going to use the purple air map. But if that's confusing, I recommend just going to the fire.airnow.gov site. And our website as well will have information about that. And you can contact Dan if you want to sign up. He sends out regular emails and also social media posts when we expect that the air quality is going to degrade. And lastly, and this is really an excellent resource, the Washington Smoke blog at wasmsmoke.blogspot.com. We try to keep that up to date every summer with the current wildfires and where we expect that smoke to go. And there's a large group of us that from a lot of the different local agencies, the State Department of Ecology, DNR, And a lot of the air resource advisors from the forestry department will help out with the smoke blog. So it really covers a lot of ground, and there's a lot of expertise that goes into keeping that up to date. So that is all I have. And if you have any questions, I am happy to answer them.
Great, thank you, Odell. And I saw the in the chat about sharing the slides, and so yes, we'll definitely send the slides to Peggy after the meeting. And Peggy, can you then distribute them to where all they need to go? Does that work?
I think that I'll send them to Mackenzie and she can send them out to everybody.
Okay, or
Okay.
Mackenzie, if you want to put your email in the chat, then we can send them directly to you.
That would be the easiest.
Okay. And so any questions for Odell before moving to Mike? I understand, I think we've got Mike squared away so that we can hear him.
I hope so. Can you guys hear me?
We can indeed.
Yes.
All right. All right, well, not hearing any questions for Odell, let's go to Mike. And then certainly if you come up with questions for Odell, we can circle back to all of us after Mike goes through his spiel.
Okay, well, I'll start. Before I get into the marijuana, let me start by thanking Lauren for getting me fixed up here so you guys can hear me talk. Okay, and I'll try to not go too long. There are usually three main areas that we take care of from an inspection standpoint. We have 4 inspections plus the compliance manager that oversees that. I'm the compliance supervisor. Of those areas within that compliance realm is the inspection is one thing, and the inspections of the sources that Lauren was referring to, the lumber mills, gas stations, crematory, coffee shops, all that. We go out to all those. We have about 800 of them in our 6-county region. We try to get to them, the big ones once a year, the smaller ones every 2 years. When it comes to marijuana, we've kind of, our way of responding has changed over the years and over some hearings that our appeals place, which is the Pollution Control Hearing Board. If we have an appeal on a violation notice, it goes to them, not to Superior Court or anything. So they've made a few rulings for our area and some other air districts on what we can do for marijuana. Long and short of it is, marijuana has agriculture exemptions. They're growing a product. Orca does not have authority over agriculture processes, except for some rare ways that we can on very small farms, but it's very difficult. However, odor is considered an air pollution. And so Orca does respond to odor complaints, typically of the sources we have. For example, not to pick on anybody, but it's just an example, but if Sierra Pacific downtown Shelton had odor or dust issues, opacity issues, anything, we could respond to them because that's a source that we inspect and register. Marijuana, we don't inspect them, but they are making a product. So we work with the facility to eliminate or reduce, I shouldn't say eliminate, to reduce odors. But when it comes down to if they just flat out say, we're not doing anything, or they ignore our suggestions and only do so much, our ability to write them a violation is very limited. So the marijuana, we are involved in it. We've been involved in every one of our counties with certain ones. If the facility doesn't want to play nice, it's very difficult for us to do anything because of the agriculture exemptions. And it goes even deeper to that, but I won't go into that too much because I won't have time to go over the things. So hopefully that answers the question in a vague way, because yes and no on that is the answer ultimately. So we do inspections as inspectors of those facilities that have air pollutants. We make sure they are, in compliance of keeping stuff under control. The other thing that this is what people know about Orca the most is basically smoke. And I say smoke because it encompasses wood stove smoke. It encompasses outdoor burning smoke. And the outdoor burning can be anything from a campfire to what we call a residential burn, which is the burning of brush, a small brush, or the land clearing burning, the big stuff. Now, Mason County is a little different. We have an agreement with Mason County. It's been in place for years, even before I got, so probably 20 years or more, where Mason County Fire Marshal will take the complaints and respond to those the best they can. And this was formed back when there was 3 of the fire marshals, fire wardens. Well, now there's just the one guy. And we actually, Robert and I met with him a couple weeks ago. So we're going to try to do some cooperation with him, have him help us. We can help him. But we will respond to complaints, but we do not issue the permits there for land clearing burning, a big clearing to develop a house or whatever. So that's something that needs a permit. In most of Orca's area, that needs a permit that we sign off on and look at. In Mason County, it goes through the, as you guys know, there it goes through the fire marshal's office. If he needs help enforcing on something, he has some enforcement abilities, but so does Orca. So if there's like garbage being burned, a lot of the fire departments in Mason County and elsewhere will send the report to Orca. We can write a violation notice. We call it a ticket. It's a civil penalty for burning garbage. So we are involved with the smoke aspect of the environment and the air quality from those realms. Outdoor burning, and it covers the campfire, brush burning, and land clearing burning, and then also wood stove smoke. What people don't realize is you can burn in your wood stove, but you can't, even if it's a certified one, you're still not allowed to create a nuisance to your neighbors. That's usually most of our calls. We'll get neighbors calling us and saying, hey, this person's burning their wood stove just really smoky and the smoke's coming into our house. Well, that is not appropriate, and that we'll try to work with them and explain to them and educate them on how to burn cleaner, but we get involved with that. The last section of the 3 would be asbestos and demolition. Even though Mason County may require demolition permits, Orca requires them also. So if people come in to Mason County to get a demolition permit, they need to be getting one from Orca also. Orca will require them to get an asbestos survey for any demolition. An asbestos survey has to be done by a licensed asbestos survey person. If they have asbestos, they are required to get an asbestos notification or permit through Orca also. So that's somewhere where, you know, the building department and stuff can really help a lot, and we can have cooperation. If there's some question about, you know, hey, does this person got the Orca permit, or if Orca had a question if they got the county permit, we can work together. Same with the city, whether they're in the county or the city of Shelton or what have you, they need to get a permit. And for Orca, even if they're not doing a demolition, if they're doing a remodel, if they put something into the county to say, hey, I'm going to remodel and totally gut my house and you know, maybe add a second story. That's not a demo, it's a renovation, but Orca would require an asbestos survey then still. And if asbestos is present, proper removal and proper handling of it if it's going to be disturbed. One common question we get is, well, if I'm going to remodel a house and I have asbestos in a different part of the house, do I have to deal with it? You don't in Orca's realm. We only will get involved if you're going to disturb it. So people don't have to get rid of asbestos or be afraid of asbestos flooring they're not going to disturb. If it's not disturbed, it's going to be fine. It's not going to bother anybody. But once it gets disturbed through a remodel or a demolition, before that disturbance occurs, they need to talk to Orca, get a permit. We call it a notification. Notify Orca that they're going to work on it, and then we'll help them with the requirements. There are small fees associated with the demo and the asbestos notifications, but for single family residents, I believe they're $42 or $43 each. So it's not, you know, it's not anything that's going to break the bank of somebody doing a remodel. It's basically that covers the program for asbestos and demolitions. The land clearing fees supposed to cover the land clearing permits. The inspection fees from the sources that pay us cover the inspection stuff. So, you know, the outdoor burning is a big section that we don't get fees for, because you can't get fees from, you know, people burning illegally or smoke complaints. So that's taken from the general fund. Jeff can go into more details if you're interested, but that's kind of where the compliance gets our money, gets our resources to go out and do this stuff. we kind of cycle in the summer when there's the burn ban. We do a whole lot of inspections because we're not doing outdoor burn stuff, and starting maybe the next week or as soon as the counties open up the burn season again and DNR opens it up, we'll get real busy doing a whole lot more complaints and stuff. And we don't have the staff to drive around looking for stuff. We're completely complaint driven. People think we're out just, driving looking for violations. No, we're complaint driven. So if you have demolition or asbestos concerns or outdoor burning concerns, you have to let us know. We'll do our best to respond. But yeah, we won't see them unless people let us know. And that's kind of where we rely on the neighbors or the counties. If you're a code enforcement people or your planner out somewhere and somebody's, they're looking at something, maybe critical areas or something, and they see a building going down and they don't think there was a permit or it wasn't planned, they can always call us. We can look it up on our database and say, hey, yeah, there is a permit, or no, there's not. There's an issue there. Real quick synopsis, the three areas, like I said, the businesses, the outdoor burning and smoke, and then the asbestos and demo. Definitely some room for some cooperation in there, both sides, because I know you guys require, and a lot of the cities within the counties that we deal with require demo permits too. So we work with them a lot. Solid waste people, we work with them a lot because they're out there at places that might be squatters or other places and trying to get people to clean stuff up. We don't want them to clean up by burning it. We want them to clean up by hauling it away. So we work together with them on a lot, and then we work with businesses as they get, city and county permits, and then they got to get an Orca permit, and we would go out and inspect that permit. Real quick spiel, I could go on and on, but I won't. So that I'll stop right there. And if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, or you can contact me later also.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions for Mike or for Odell or Lauren or myself?
I think you answered my questions. I kind of knew that was the answer, though.
Commissioner Netherland, anything to offer? I know, again, you've been on the member of the Orca board for quite a while.
No, just appreciate you guys coming and speaking with everybody. It was nice to make that connection. To be honest with you, I'm surprised we hadn't done it years and years earlier. I'm glad that you came up with this idea to meet with the different entities. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. So, Odell, I'm assuming you see Mackenzie's email in there. So if you could send your slides to Mackenzie, and then Mackenzie can distribute them. And again, our contact information are on the slides. I'll put my email address in the chat as well. But again, so don't hesitate.
Is M. Smith Mackenzie or
Yes.
Diane?
I think it's Mackenzie.
Oh, okay.
It says Diane on our screen, but it really is Mackenzie.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. If there's no other questions for Jeff's team, I guess we'll move on to the housing needs assessment.
Okay. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Can you see this presentation I have up here?
It is on the screen.
Oh, good. Everything's working. My name is Todd Chase. I am an economist and principal at FCS Group. Todd Parker invited us to attend today, so I appreciate that invitation. He is managing a state-funded housing needs assessment for Mason County, and we were fortunate enough to be selected to do that work. Our company's based in Redmond, Washington, and we get to work all over the Pacific Northwest on housing-related infrastructure projects. So today we just wanted to, with me is Tim Wood. Tim is a planner at FCS Group and economist. And we have some draft findings to share. We have about 12, 13 slides to touch on, and should only take about 10 minutes to give you an overview, and then happy to talk about some questions and issues and for general discussion if you have the time. So I will go and lead off with what we're going to cover briefly here are the project objectives, some of the emerging trends impacting housing and housing attainability in Mason County, touch on the stakeholder input we've received so far. And one of the main objectives of this work is to document, quantify 20-year housing needs by different types of housing and different affordability price points. First, I'll just touch on what is a housing needs assessment. Since this is probably the first one that's been done in Mason County in quite some time. I know in 2019, you all successfully had a housing workforce summit that had a lot of public input. Maybe some of you were involved, I'm sure, and some good direction, at least to begin to think about being more proactive about funding different types of housing in the county and what you can do by coordinating more with the city of Shelton and other communities around you. So that was a great start. And then you received the grant. And this project's aimed at pulling together current data, public input, and understanding some of the existing policies, funding and code related, to analyze all that information to come up with a 20-year assessment of housing needs. This is really the first step before you get into the nitty-gritty of then amending some of your policies to a housing action plan and a comprehensive plan update. And Kel Welland will be taking that on probably next year. And then Jason Dose continues to implement some code updates in the city of Shelton. But a lot of this information is a basis of findings of fact to make those amendments down the road. So I'll ask Tim to run through a couple of the trends for us, and then I'll get into some of the policy and stakeholder input.
Sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Really happy and excited to be able to share out this data with you. So we'll start off with the population growth forecast, which is provided by the Office of Financial Management in Washington State. In earlier iterations of our report, we were looking at multiple population growth projections, but we received direction pretty early on to stick with the medium growth forecast. And for Mason County, that's 19,686 people and over, and that translates to 10,130 new housing units over the next 20 years. So starting looking at 2022, and you can see we go out there to 2042, that dashed line indicates projected population growth.
Tim?
Yeah, please go ahead.
How is that relative to other communities in Washington? Is that a more modest growth or on par?
It's in keeping with a lot of what we're seeing in the greater Puget Sound area, not simply King County and Snohomish County and Pierce County, but more broadly all around. We've seen a lot of pressure, population pressure and development pressure in Mason County throughout this project. So there's pretty clearly some spillover into Mason County, and it's basically in keeping with the greater urbanized Washington State population growth rate.
It might be a little bit low because of the pandemic has seen kind of an uptick in the growth in Mason County, I think, as people kind of flock out of denser urban areas to more, rural and suburban environments. But at the same point, this is just the permanent resident population, so it doesn't reflect the additional, demand from second homeowners.
Right, which we'll get into here in a bit, which is definitely one of the major findings that we found. The next slide shows the data that we were able to gather on housing construction permit trends over the last 5 years or so. This shows, kind of a pretty stable amount of development. You can see ranging from about 500 to, in 2019 as low as about 350, but still really healthy growth countywide. You'll notice there that we've delineated Shelton along with the rest of the county, since that's the level of detail that we were provided. 2,250 total housing units over that 5-year period of time. But of course, demand, as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, is exceeding production. So we'll get into that a little bit later on in this presentation as well. A quick snapshot of existing conditions. So one of our favorite ways to look at existing housing conditions is not just housing type, which you'll see in this graph, but also by tenure. So what you're seeing here is the total number of units in a particular category. So there on the left of this graph, you see single family detached housing is the predominant amount of housing in the county. Next up is manufactured and other home types over there on the right. And then townhomes, plexes, and multifamily make a pretty small amount. Now, the color coding on this graph is pretty important. So that darker blue component there, that makes up the base of all of these lines, or the column, sorry, that's owner-occupied dwellings. So dwellings that are occupied by those who own them. Renter-occupied is the next up, that lighter green component of the bar. So not a lot of renter-occupied housing writ large in the county. And then the purple pink component there at the top of all of these columns, although predominantly in single family detached, that is other vacant and seasonal. So read that as second homes or temporary rentals like Airbnbs and that kind of thing. So you've got a pretty substantial amount of other vacant and seasonal. That's, and in our experience, it looks a little like a coastal community in Oregon in that sense. So you've got, a fair amount of your housing stock tied up in vacant and otherwise seasonal units. Top line here, 34,000 dwelling units in the county right now. And if we go back to that projection slide, we're looking at another 10,000 over the next 20 years. So a pretty substantial growth rate relative to the baseline. Next slide. And we're going to take a quick look at home value index. So here we've got a few good exhibits for you. On the top left, we'll start there. That's Zillow median home value in data there. So this is the median value of homes in a particular area. So here we're looking at Belfair and Shelton, and we're using Olympia and Tacoma to compare. So the top lines there, you can see by January of 2022, Belfair and Shelton homes were right in the mix with Olympia and Tacoma in terms of overall value, right in that kind of $450,000 to $500,000 range. But the thing that we're most interested in is the far right column on that table, which shows annual change. So you're seeing in Belfair 23.4% growth annually over the last 2 years, and in Shelton nearly 30% of the same. So really red hot growth in both of those communities, which again, I'm sure I'm not surprising anybody by telling you that. The next graph over there on the right, the upper right there, the housing affordability index, you can see just in the last year has been dropping pretty significantly, from a score of affordability of about 140 all the way down to about 98.5 in June. So certainly things are getting less affordable. And you can see there that the mortgage rates on the bottom right graph there are increasing. And again, not shocking anyone there. We're seeing in Oregon some that are getting as high as 7% right now. So certainly affordability is these two factors, mortgage rates and affordability relative to overall housing cost. We're running into a pretty major affordability issue in Mason County. I mean, it's certainly statewide, but Mason County is seeing it pretty substantially. Another measure that we like to take a look at is severe rent burden. So this is a condition where renter households pay 50% or more of their income on rent. So pretty dire circumstance for folks to be experiencing. You can see in this graph, Mason County, countywide, right about in line with Washington State, a little bit less severe rent burden. But within Shelton, 30% or close to 30% of your renter households are experiencing severe rent burden. So again, another way to tell you affordability is becoming more and more scarce over time.
Yeah, HUD kind of likes to see this at a 30% level is kind of what they consider the attainable. And so when it gets over 50, they call that severe. Anything over 30 is rent burdened. And of course, that's a huge number. But the 50 is the one that really kind of raises the flags.
Right.
I wholeheartedly agree that it's an issue, but I was curious on the numbers you're taking, the valuation and Zoom and that. When was that done? Because even in the last 6 months, housing prices have dropped considerably in Shelton.
Yeah, certainly we're always looking for the latest, but we tend to take those snapshots and we've seen some drop, but overall over the last 2 years we see a pretty substantial increase in price. We'll see that fluctuate, I'm sure, over the next year, but still baseline housing is getting pretty expensive.
We can update the numbers. We'll take a look at the current month before we publish our report. That's a great point.
Yeah, we can update that exhibit pretty easily.
Some of these data are old, like this poverty and Alice data. Like this is like 2019, and so I'm sure, and they don't publish it very often from United Way, so we don't have better data for this one. But I'm sure the situation's gotten worse.
Yeah, and what we're looking at here is poverty along with what's called ALICE, which is a data set that's put together by United Way. It stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, but Employed. So that's folks who aren't quite hitting the federal poverty standard, but who are still experiencing a lot of cost burden on many things. And it's just basically a supplemental measure to poverty that we like to take a look at as well. And you can see here, relative to the state of Washington, Mason County's got a little higher poverty rate and a little higher ALICE rate. And then within Shelton, we're seeing a higher still poverty rate than the county and a higher still ALICE rate among residents there in Shelton. Close to, over half of residents in Shelton are either poverty households or in that ALICE threshold. So affordability is, again, certainly an issue in Shelton we're seeing.
This measure does take into account costs of transportation, healthcare, those types of things on top of housing.
Right. Another thing we took a look at, at the request of a lot of county and city staff, was just making sure that we understand kind of what it looks like for, at-risk subgroups. So this larger graph that you see starting on the top left there, that's measurements of several different subgroups that we like to take a look at in these reports. So victims of domestic violence, you can see you've got 11,000 plus households in that category. And of course, some of this overlaps, but not a lot. Senior citizens, another, 10,400 there. Households, disability households, about 6,300. Veterans, you got about 5,000 households of veterans. And then a couple other risk categories there. Another population we like to take a look at is households that are identifying as Hispanic or Latino. And that graph down there at the bottom right, you can see Mason County just a little below the share of the population that identifies as Hispanic or Latino. But then within Shelton, you got 21% of the population identifying as Hispanic or Latino. So certainly, another way that Shelton differs from the county at large.
And homeless down there towards the bottom, the most recent 2022 point in time counts about 238 persons experiencing homelessness or houselessness. It's the latest count. It's been kind of holding steady the last couple of years. I've seen it going way up in Mason County. We did quite a bit of interviews as part of this, and we're hoping with advisory committees like this group and with county and city staff we've been working with, along with interviews with housing nonprofits, developers, and brokers, we can start to ground truth some of this data and understand some of the issues and policies. Here's a list of some of the folks we talked with over the last 6 months Bremerton Housing Authority, Housing Kitsap, they have been managing the Mason County vouchers for years. Till recently, I think it's starting to switch back over to Mason County Housing Authority. But so they had great information. They've told me that both those housing authorities now have about 2,000 on their wait lists. And, they pretty much stopped, the cut off the wait lists for now because it's just too much to handle people on there for years and years. But at the same time, they are also making headway with seeing, units added every year. But they did mention, I'll talk about some of the issues on the next slide, some of the challenges and successes underway. Yeah, nice. We had Cahote communities where they're building the Veterans Village in city of Shelton. It's under construction now. That's kind of an innovative project for veterans. I think they're senior veterans, I believe. And so those vouchers are available now. Haven't all been used up yet. And there's some other programs that they've done successfully with foster kids and needing homes. So they've expedited their voucher wait lists for the foster children or youth that are homeless, that are in the system. So there's certain things they're doing, certain constraints that they mentioned regarding staffing, for as one of the constraints. But
so if we're doing Mason County, out of curiosity, why are we interviewing in Kitsap and Bremerton?
Well, they've been managing the housing voucher program in Mason County for the last, I don't know how many years. So they've been taking, and so they have a good handle on the situation there as well.
Thank you.
If I may for 1 second, 20 years ago or so, the management of the Mason County Housing Authority had lost its ability to function. They worked to deal with Kitsap, and Kitsap actually controls all the vouchers. Even to this day now that's been restructured, they still have complete control of them because they stay with the person and so on and so forth. So we're working on that here in Mason County to try and make something happen there.
I was just going to ask, Randy, is there any thought on bringing it back home?
Yes, there's been an attempt to do that for a long time, but it stays with the person, and those vouchers are basically out there. And there's a debt owed to the Kitsap Housing Authority in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
And so the top barriers they mentioned, of course, is funding, the need for at least one, what they call a navigator staff person that can help maybe among all those housing authorities, Mason County, Kitsap, and Bremerton, to basically match the housing available with the applicant, because right now the system is so daunting and challenging. It's very difficult for the applicants to stay on top of it and for the staff to manage it as well. So that could be a coordinated position down the road. Talking with some of the infrastructure providers for water, sewer in Mason County, it seems like there's capacity and there's plans to build extensions, but the timing and funding is, of course, the big question mark. So the long time lags between the provision of infrastructure and the ability to serve it with water and sewer, and new housing with water and sewer. So that's creating, a big challenge there. Tim mentioned housing costs rising faster than income levels. That's everywhere we work these days. But yeah, there's some opportunities. The city county revenue from the affordable housing levy was put into place a couple of years ago. That's coordinated with Shelton and Mason County, so that's a new revenue source. And there's certainly immediate market demand for rentals at market rates, as well as manufactured home parks. types. I've seen a lot of demand for this to be delivered by private industry with very little public subsidy required. And so that the key is just controlling the right site, close enough to sewer where you can serve it with public sewer. But that seems to be the huge market in the near term for naturally occurring affordable housing. Shelton's undergone a couple of code changes to make it easier to build accessory dwellings. They're working on their cottage code. They have that new project underway. I mentioned Veterans Village. And so they're trying to make it easier to develop there. Belfair has the EIS for sub area to expand their service area into an area to add more housing. And that Veterans Village project is actually a pretty cool national example or state example to follow. So we'll be monitoring that closely. When we looked at the housing demand, we tried to break it up by different types. So we have a baseline housing demand, which is driven by the population with this second home market, assuming that stays constant at about 30% of total demand. That's about 10,100 units over 20 years. Then we have a group quarters need, which is a kind of a combination of things. It's assisted living, congregate care, but it could also be, correctional facility demand as well. So it's kind of a big mix of needs there as population grows. And then we have pent-up demand for market rentals based on the shortage of supply in line with income levels. That's about at least 376 units. And when we say pent-up demand, that's probably a near-term market opportunity, whereas these other demand components are 20-year forecasts. That one's probably more like a 5-year forecast. Same with government-assisted housing. Big pent-up demand for that, pretty much at least 326 units in 5 years. But those are what we put into the program. And that comes up with an overall housing need of 11,573 units. Plus, we have potential for manufactured home rehabilitation and replacements. Many of the manufactured homes, and there's over 6,000 of them in the county, are kind of ending their useful life. So those will need to be replaced at some point or demolished. So better to have replacement programs, weatherization programs, things that they can do to stay in those homes. But about 3,200 units of demand there for 20 years. So the total need about 14,700 or so units. Big market, big demand. We tried to break it down by location here. City of Shelton, about 1,371 units over 20 years would be an ideal. They can accommodate that through capacity changes in their code. So that's going to be the next step to see if their capacity will accommodate that there. And then the urban growth areas around the city of Shelton, plus other communities, small rural communities, could accommodate potentially 4,768 units. A lot of that is also detached housing, but most of the more affordable, attainable townhomes, plexes, apartments would likely need to occur in Shelton. And then the manufactured home demand is huge, probably 1,000 units or more in the Laurel County, 689 in the UGAs. And if we could provide it inside Shelton, 197 units there. So this would be kind of a mix that would help kind of optimize revenue or attainability for folks with a little more focus on townhomes, plexes, apartments, 5 units per structure or more, and manufactured homes than you might have seen in the last 10 years. And then we try to look at this by price point as well. And so, of course, most of the upper income folks, median income about 50,000 or so, so 120% of that, those folks would barely be able to afford a detached home. So it's going to probably require two earners to get into that standard home. Then you have the upper middle at 80 to 120% of the median. It's more likely to need townhomes, apartments, or cottage homes. And then when you get into the lower income categories, now we're talking about, more plexes, manufactured homes, apartments. And then at the very low, we're really talking government assisted at some point. So, a good demand for that, 3,000 units or so of government assisted housing over 20 years. And then transitional shelters in kind of the other category, as well as group housing and that type of mix. So we at least have a understanding of the big picture now. So the next challenge will be, and I think what I've seen is the capacity is there in terms of vacant land, but funding is kind of the weak point. And the next step is going to be to refine and accept the housing needs assessment. The county will have to take action on that. And then that usually sets the stage for policy changes, maybe new funding strategies. There's some different types of programs we can consider with kind of like a real estate excise tax for affordable housing could be considered. Those are things we're going to start to look closer at in the next stage as you kind of advance a housing action plan and comp plan update next year. But the types of strategies we tend to focus on for communities are what kind of zoning and code changes are needed to make it easier to build in your community. Are there regulatory impediments like setbacks and things like that that could be changed? Are there financial incentives we could put into place? Sometimes that means kind of, lowering or exempting affordable housing from impact fees, and maybe providing, some, if the community has funding from your affordable housing tax levy, and maybe instead of building housing with it, you can actually acquire land that's in foreclosure if you can find it, and then use that with a partnership with a nonprofit to build housing down the road. We may not get into too much tax exemption and abatement because I don't know if the housing, if the population allows that yet as a policy. But, that's one of the strategies we've used. Partnerships is probably the biggest success story in all public housing projects we've worked on. Involves either a land trust, a nonprofit, and a public agency working together. And then there's a number of custom options that cities are starting to explore. So that's just the snapshot of where we are, and we can open it up for questions.
Oh, can't hear you, Peggy.
Go ahead, Sharon.
All right, thank you. So I was wondering, you talked about a lot of like zoning changes and things like that. Do you also work with Olympia Master Builders or others so that you can make sure that those code changes are compliant with the things that they're trying to get through the legislature?
Right. Yeah. And I think that's going to be kind of the next step as part of the housing action plan. If certain code changes are being contemplated, we certainly will have a public process to get input on whether that's going to be effective or not. And so that becomes just another stakeholder to include in that process. I think any code changes that happen won't happen as part of the Housing Act needs assessment. It'll be the action plan and the comp plan update next year.
Okay, and then along that line also, just a lot of the changes that the legislature is requesting is very costly to builders and to others as well. And so as you move ahead, I guess it's not a question, but a request, if you could continually work to make sure that the costs to build the homes so that we can have homes for people to live, if you could direct your message to them, asking them to keep the costs or their ideas within means of the builders and those that are buying the homes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you look at those cost increases of 20+% per year, and we'll update that figure, of course, but yeah, that some of that is just cost of development.
Okay, Steve, did you have something you wanted to ask? You're muted. Oh, no. Okay, Randy?
Yeah, you mentioned different revenue packages for housing authorities and the like. Here in Mason County, we have none connected to our housing authority. What do you know that is out there and availability for them to be able to do that? I can see them in my perfect world, they'd be selling the units that they have and building new units. There's different ways of doing partnerships, but there's no initial revenue except for the sale of those units. If there was another opportunity, that may change everything. What do you guys know?
Yeah, well, the housing authority is basically a nonprofit entity that can manage voucher programs. It can expedite that process of matching applicants with housing. It might be it'll be a recipient down the road of HUD funding. I've been told through the interviews anyway that the rent levels for Mason County that are considered eligible for home funding are lower than what they are for some of the surrounding counties like Kitsap County, in part because they might have lobbied HUD or appealed HUD's calculations. So, the money was spent on that effort to increase the value of the vouchers for their county, so they receive more money from HUD just from doing that. I don't, as far as funding the authority goes, yeah, I'm not sure whether there's enough fund balance in the affordable housing tax levy that is being implemented locally now to allocate some of that to your operations for the Mason County, housing authority. But down the road, that's one revenue option. And then the real estate excise tax, of course, we just talked about lowering the cost for housing. Well, yeah, that real estate excise tax of 0.5% on home values or something like that would be a funding source if you could have a commensurate decrease in impact fees potentially, or some other fee. Maybe it's net zero for the developer. Sometimes, what we've been doing lately is a lot of the impact fees for counties are one size fits all for detached homes. And we've been successful lately in trying to vary that by home size. So a smaller home pays less than a big home. And so with that 1% or 0.5% excise tax, the standard size home builder might actually not have an increase in their overall construction costs if we can vary the impact fees by home size. So there's all these little innovative tricks and techniques we can do that could eventually result in some funding for you. But right now, you need some money.
Steve?
Yeah, I one of the areas that we're working on at the fire department and the District 5 and throughout our service area generally is reciting all of our fire stations, because they're in the wrong places. Every one of them is in the wrong place for the service area that it provides. So along the lines of the housing developments, we're looking and monitoring the growth of the different areas so that we can appropriately site our new stations. And this is a long-term project. I'm not talking about any time in the next couple of years. I'm talking about 5 and 6 years out. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to consider at the fire district level to appropriately serve the entire community.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, through those processes, sometimes it can result in surplus land. And if that's the case, you know, it'd be great if the county can have the right of first refusal for, you know, these surplus properties, or properties that might be surplus, whether it be from, you know, in fire department or, you know, a transportation agency or some other group. So, you know, land seems to be critical to the equation.
Any other questions for Todd?
Hey, this is Kevin.
Yes.
So I just thank you. I just want to just say thanks to FCS Group for the work on putting this draft together. I think there was a lot of really good discussion that they had with stakeholders and other folks throughout the process, and I'm really encouraged to hear some of the questions today. And I think this is certainly not the end of the conversation, but the beginning of I think a really important one for our community. And you know, Commissioner Nevlin, I think you know, being able to track down some housing trust fund dollars and do some other work to help bring some additional funding into the housing authority is something that we can help lean in on with them once things stabilize a little bit more over there. I think there are opportunities to do those, to look for those funding sources, and then to, as they mentioned, maybe even appeal the voucher rates to see if they are where they ought to be, as well as the money that we're generating by having accepted the parameters of House Bill 1406 a couple of years ago, which isn't a new tax on the community. It's a rebate of a portion of the state sales tax that comes back to us to use for affordable housing. So one of the other things that I wanted to note that was mentioned earlier in the presentation that I think is really interesting and impactful to our housing market is the amount of houses here that are used as secondary or vacation rental homes. And so one of the things that the commission talked to our planning department staff about at our retreat this summer was really evaluating our policies and regulations around just the short-term rental market, vacation rental market in the community, and asked them to take a look at what's happening in other high tourism counties in terms of regulating those homes and for that use. It's just one of those things that does create a drag on our market in terms of availability for housing, and I think it skews some of our data when we're looking at where we stand, kind of big picture. So just a couple of things that I think really jumped out at me from the presentation and reading through the draft. Just much more conversation to come. This is a really important topic for our community.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions for Todd? Thank you very much for your presentation. I hope we will hear more from you.
I look forward to it. You can do good work. Thank you.
Okay. So any public comment? Hearing none. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I so move.
Can I get a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
And I'm sure no one will say nay, but okay. See you next time. Thank you.